29 points in a single quarter, 4 touchdowns and 5 extra points. Bear in mind, the most touchdowns by a receiver is 5 in a game. This man got 4 in a quarter. That man is Don Hutson, the first modern receiver, and he did this in his final season after playing 11 years in the league.
I think Don Hutson is the most dominant single player at his position of any in NFL history.
The Packers receiver played in the 1930s and 1940s and utterly dominated. Born in Arkansas, he used to play with snakes growing up, and that's where he says he gets his speed and agility. He was nicknamed the Alabama Antelope with a 9.7 second 100-yard time. At that point, the world record was 9.4 seconds, but Hutson was 6'1" and 185 pounds. At the time, people played both offense and defense, and the game was far more physical. Most teams thought he was too fragile. Well, he was never injured, and he was a man amongst boys. Lucky for the Packers, they took a chance. But they weren't the only team. He also signed with the Brooklyn Dodgers, the football team. Both contracts were mailed to the NFL commissioner, and Green Bay's contract was the one accepted because it had been postmarked first by 20 minutes. His first game would be against the Chicago Bears, and Hutson recalls sitting in the locker room listening to the radio. Apparently, the host thought Don Hutson was too fragile, too skinny to play, criticizing the Packers for signing him. Well, Hutson was a man who let his play speak for itself. The very first play of his career was an 83-yard touchdown, and it didn't take teams long to realize what they were dealing with. Players began routinely doubling him, sometimes tripling, the first receiver to be covered this way. He was so good, everybody knew he was getting the ball, but still, nobody could stop him. In his 11-year career, he led the league in receiving 7 times, led the NFL in touchdowns 9 times, and holds the record for most consecutive years leading the NFL in touchdown catches at 5. He's also second with 4. In 1942, he had 74 catches. The next closest, 27. He was also an elite defender, leading the NFL in interceptions in 1940, and he'd retire with 30 career interceptions. He also led the league in extra points made 3 times and field goals once. Yet he was not just a touchdown machine. He literally changed the way football was played. Hutson was the playbook, scheming up routes himself, often on the fly. He schemed up the first ever post pattern in the huddle against the Rams, and that's just one of many in a catalogue of moves and fakes he created. He was also the first player to perfect the fake. Greasy Neal, the Eagles coach, said, "Hutson is the only man I've ever saw who could feint in 3 different directions at the same time." His precise routes were game-changing, deceptively fast, and great hands. He retired with 99 touchdowns, 3 times as many as any player at the time. It took 4 decades for somebody, Steve Largent, to overtake that record. But Hutson did it in an era where passes were mainly reserved for third downs or long yardage first downs, and the season was only 10 games. 20% of all his receptions were touchdowns. 1 touchdown every 5 catches. Despite retiring with 19 NFL records, the most significant came on October 7th, 1945 against the Detroit Lions. But before the 1945 season began, Hutson announced his retirement. When he first entered the league, the effects of the Great Depression were still being felt. Towards the end of his career, it was World War II. But Hutson had been lucky. When he started, he was earning $300 a week, which is a lot more than the rest of his peers. Now planning to retire, the Packers knew how important he was to the team's success. Coach Curly Lambeau made him an offer to stay. Hutson counted with $15,000. The only other player earning that at the time was Sammy Baugh. He'd get his money and more history would be made. Over 25,000 were there to watch this historic event, and the Lions did have one of the best defenses. Detroit went up 7-0 in the second quarter, but after the Packers responded with 2 touchdowns, the Lions knew what they had to do. Double team Hutson. That should work, right? Well, Hutson would get his second touchdown a few plays after this adjustment. On the Lions' next play, a Packers interception put them at the Lions 17. Guess what? Another Hutson touchdown. For some reason, it was man-to-man on this play. Not that it really made a difference. He was going to score regardless. And before the half came to an end, Hutson got 1 more touchdown, putting Green Bay up 41-7. Hutson had scored 29 points, 4 touchdowns, and 5 extra points in 13 minutes. He'd sit out most of the second half. If not, he might have passed Ernie Never's record for most points in a game, which was 40. The game would finish 57-21, and Hutson holds the record for points in a quarter to this day. The Lions head coach summed up the game in 3 words. Too much Hutson. Alright, thanks for watching.